Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving deep into the world of history's most audacious heists, the top 10 biggest bank robberies ever. Our source material is a fascinating blog article from Charts, a UK-based bullion dealer with over 60 years of experience in the precious metals business. You know, when you think about it, banks, those supposed fortresses of finance, have always presented an irresistible target for criminals.
It's true. They represent concentrated wealth, making them a tempting target. And given their line of work, Charts likely has a unique perspective on heists involving precious metals.
That's a great point. Let's jump right into the list. But instead of a strict countdown, let's explore these heists thematically, starting with some of the most elaborate schemes. For instance, the Banco Central burglary in Brazil back in 2005. They actually dug a tunnel into the vault.
Isn't that incredible? They rented a property nearby and meticulously dug a 250-foot tunnel, complete with lighting and air conditioning to access the vault. It was an incredibly sophisticated operation, netting them a staggering $71.6 million in cash.
It makes you wonder about the bank's security measures at the time. I mean, how would a tunnel like that go undetected for so long?
It really highlights the cat-and-mouse game between security measures and those seeking to overcome them. As security systems advance, so do the tactics of those trying to break them. The Banco Central heist demonstrates the lengths criminals will go to in pursuit of their target.
Speaking of meticulous planning, that brings us to the Dunbar armored robbery from 1997 in Los Angeles. The mastermind behind this heist was Alan Pace, a safety inspector for Dunbar. Talk about a classic case of betrayal.
He was essentially a wolf in sheep's clothing, meticulously studying security protocols, observing guard routines, and identifying weaknesses over several years. Pace knew the system inside and out, which enabled him and his accomplices to make off with $18.9 million.
You'd think with all that meticulous planning, they would have been extra careful, right? But they were actually caught because one of Pace's associates carelessly gave away some of the money with the original cash straps still attached.
It's a stark reminder that even the most intricate plans can be undone by seemingly trivial oversights. This seemingly minor detail led investigators right to them.
It almost seems like a darkly comedic twist, like something out of a movie.
Absolutely. And it speaks to the human element present in all of these heists. For all their planning and precision, criminals are still susceptible to human error. And it's often these oversights that lead to their downfall.
Moving from meticulously planned operations to a heist that thrived on chaos and opportunity. Let's travel back to 1976 during Lebanon's civil war for the British Bank of the Middle East robbery.
Imagine the chaos and lawlessness of a city in the throes of civil war. It was the perfect cover for a daring heist.
Estimates place the stolen amount somewhere between $20 to $50 million, including cash, gold bars, and jewels. What I find fascinating is that it remains unsolved to this day. The loot has never been recovered, and no one has been arrested.
It truly is a mystery shrouded in the fog of war. Some speculate that the perpetrators had inside help, given their knowledge of the bank's layout and security. Others believe it was a highly organized criminal group that took advantage of the tumultuous environment.
It really highlights the unpredictable nature of heists. Sometimes, even with meticulous planning, the outcome can be uncertain. Other times, a volatile situation creates an unexpected opportunity for those willing to seize it.
Speaking of unpredictable, the Dar es Salaam bank heist in Baghdad back in 2007 is another one that's rife with speculation and unanswered questions.
Taking place in a city still reeling from the effects of war and political instability. This heist resulted in an estimated $282 million vanishing. The identity of the perpetrators and the exact circumstances of the robbery remain a puzzle.
It's a fascinating case because there are theories about it being an inside job, potentially involving corrupt officials or even militia groups, but concrete evidence remains elusive, adding to the mystery.
It makes you realize that sometimes the most perplexing heists are those where the truth may never fully surface, and that the most valuable asset for some of these criminals was not just their meticulous planning, but also their ability to capitalize on a chaotic environment.
Now shifting our focus to a heist with a lasting legacy. Let's delve into the Brink's-Mat burglary of 1983. It's so infamous in the UK that they even made a TV show about it.
Right, that's the gold. This one particularly resonates with Charts, being bullion dealers themselves. The robbers hit a depot near Heathrow Airport, getting away with about 26 million pounds worth of gold bullion, diamonds, and cash.
What's fascinating about Brink's-Mat is how they managed to melt down and redistribute the stolen gold. It's not as simple as just selling gold bars, is it? It requires a network of fences, smelters, and distributors to make it untraceable.
That's a really good point. I guess it was this effective system that ensured much of the gold has never been recovered. It's said to have entered the UK's criminal underworld, possibly even circulating to this day. Makes you wonder. If you were to buy a gold chain today, could part of it be from this legendary heist?
It's certainly a possibility, and it illustrates the long-term impact a single heist can have. The Brinksmat gold likely fueled other criminal activities, corrupting legitimate businesses and enriching criminal organizations. It's almost like a ripple effect, with the consequences extending far beyond the initial crime.
It's amazing how a single event can have such a ripple effect, impacting not just the immediate victims, but also the wider economy and criminal networks. Speaking of lasting impact, the Northern bank robbery in Belfast back in 2004 stands out for its audacity and the immense pressure put on those involved.
Absolutely. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, the families of 2 bank managers were taken hostage. They were forced to cooperate with the robbers, enabling them to access the bank and steal over $41 million, which is more than 30 million British pounds.
Can you imagine the stress and fear those families must have endured? It adds a whole other layer to the crime, beyond the monetary loss.
It's a stark reminder that these heists aren't just about numbers. They involve real people, and the consequences can be devastating and long-lasting. The psychological impact on the victims and their families can be profound.
Shifting gears a bit, the Knightsbridge security deposit robbery in London in 1987 involves a lone wolf robber, Valerio Vice, who poses as sheik to gain access to the vault. It almost sounds like something out of a movie.
He was quite the character, charming and sophisticated, using his charisma to fool everyone. Vice convinced the staff he was a wealthy businessman interested in renting a safe deposit box. But once inside, he and an accomplice overpowered the guards, taking control of the vault.
It's incredible how he managed to pull that off. You have to admire his audacity, even if his actions were criminal. And he got away with a staggering $97 million in cash, jewelry, and valuables.
And to top it off, he managed to stay hidden for years, even sending taunting postcards to the police while on the run.
That's almost too brazen to believe. It really highlights the psychological aspect of these criminals. What drives someone to take such risks? Not just for the money, but seemingly for the thrill of it all.
Well, greed certainly plays a role, but there's often more to it than that. For some, it's the intellectual challenge, the thrill of outsmarting a system, the adrenaline rush of pulling off something seemingly impossible.
It's almost like they view it as a game, a high-stakes puzzle to be solved.
Exactly. And let's not forget the allure of the outlaw, the romanticized image of the master criminal. Think about how Hollywood often portrays these figures. It glamorizes the heist, focusing on the cleverness and audacity of the criminals rather than the harm they inflict.
That's a good point. Sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of the story
And
forget about the real-world consequences. And speaking of consequences, it makes me wonder what happens to all the stolen money. Do these criminals ever actually get to enjoy their ill-gotten gains?
Well, it varies. Sometimes a portion of the loot is recovered, like in the case of the Securitas Depot robbery, which we'll get to shortly. But often the money vanishes into a complex web of underground networks.
Is that where money laundering comes in? I've heard that term, but I'm not entirely sure what it means.
Money laundering is essentially the process of making illegally obtained money appear legitimate. They might use shell corporations' offshore accounts, or invest in assets like property or art to disguise the origin of the funds. It's a sophisticated process designed to make it nearly impossible to trace the money back to the crime.
So it's not like in the movies where they just sail off into the sunset with a suitcase full of cash.
Rarely. The reality is much more complicated. They might have to lie low for years, constantly looking over their shoulder. And even then, there's always the risk of being caught or betrayed. It's a high-stakes game with long-lasting consequences.
And a reminder that crime, even on this grand scale, often doesn't pay off in the long run. Now let's move on to the Securitas Depot robbery in the UK. From 2006, this one was a massive operation, with a haul of $83 million or 53 million British pounds, which is just an unbelievable amount of cash.
What's particularly disturbing about this one is the level of violence involved. The robbers kidnapped the depot manager and his family, threatening their lives to force his cooperation. They even went so far as to disguise themselves as police officers to gain entry to the depot.
That's just terrifying. To think about the trauma inflicted on that family, being caught up in such a dangerous situation, it sends chills down my spine.
Absolutely. And it brings to light the human cost of these crimes. While we might be captivated by the audacious nature of these heists, we shouldn't lose sight of the victims.
Speaking of audacious, the United California Bank heist from 1972 was fueled by a rather interesting theory, wasn't it?
Yes. The robbers believed President Nixon was hiding a secret slush fund in that bank. They were convinced he was using illegally obtained money for political purposes. Of course, this turned out to be false. But it added a layer of intrigue to the case.
I can imagine. And they were so meticulous about cleaning up any evidence, wiping down surfaces, and trying to make it appear as if nothing had happened. Except they made one crucial mistake.
Ah, yes, the infamous dishwasher. They forgot to wipe it down, leaving their fingerprints behind. It's often those seemingly insignificant details that unravel even the most carefully crafted plans.
It almost makes you wonder if there's some sort of psychological element at play, a subconscious desire to get caught, or perhaps simply a case of overconfidence leading to carelessness.
It's a fascinating thought, and it's those little quirks, those moments of human fallibility that make these stories so captivating.
Okay, we're reaching the top of the list now. And it's time to talk about the biggest bank robbery in history. The Central Bank of Iraq robbery in 2003. Now, this wasn't your typical group of criminals, was it?
Not at all. This heist was orchestrated by Saddam Hussein himself, just before the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq. Imagine that a dictator essentially robbing his own country's central bank.
It's almost too outlandish to believe.
He had his son Qasem oversee the operation. They loaded over $920 million onto trucks and simply drove away. It was a brazen act of theft on an almost unimaginable scale.
And then there's the bizarre twist that U.S. soldiers later found a significant portion of the stolen cash hidden in one of Saddam Hussein's palaces.
It's a strange and ironic footnote to this already remarkable story. And what's even more astonishing is that some of those U.S. soldiers were caught stealing a portion of the recovered money.
Talk about adding insult to injury. It's like something out of a dark comedy, where greed and opportunism seem to override every other consideration.
It certainly adds another layer of complexity to this already unbelievable tale. The Central Bank of Iraq robbery is a stark reminder that during times of war and political upheaval, the lines between right and wrong, legal and illegal, can become incredibly blurred.
And it brings us to the final point of our deep dive today. The question of how bank robberies might evolve in our increasingly digital world. We've seen how criminals have exploited chaos and opportunity, utilized meticulous planning, and even manipulated systems from within. But as we move further into a world of virtual currencies and online transactions, what does the future hold for the art of the heist?
That's a question that deserves its own deep dive. But one thing is for sure, as technology advances, so too will the methods of those seeking to exploit it. We're already seeing a rise in cybercrime, with hackers targeting financial institutions and individuals alike.
It's almost like a digital arms race, with security experts constantly trying to stay one step ahead of the criminals. But perhaps more importantly, we need to understand the psychology behind these crimes. What drives individuals to risk everything for a big score, whether in the physical world or the digital realm?
It seems that the human element will always be a factor, whether we're talking about physical bank robberies or sophisticated cyber attacks. Greed, ambition, the desire for power or control. These are universal motivators.
And as our world becomes increasingly interconnected, the potential targets and the scale of these crimes could become even greater.
Precisely. Think about the vast amounts of data stored in the cloud, the trillions of dollars flowing through global financial networks. It's a tempting target for anyone with the skills and the audacity to exploit it.
So in a way, we're moving from the era of cracking vaults and digging tunnels to a new frontier of digital heists, where the weapons are lines of code and the loot is information or virtual currency.
That's a compelling way to put it, and it raises a whole new set of challenges for law enforcement agencies. How do you track down a criminal who can operate from anywhere in the world, leaving behind virtually no physical trace?
It seems like you're going to need a new breed of detectives, those who understand not just the criminal mind, but also the intricacies of the digital world.
Absolutely. The future of crime fighting will require a blend of traditional investigative techniques and cutting-edge technological expertise.
It's both fascinating and a little bit daunting to think about. And it makes the stories we've discussed today, these analog blueprints of audacious crimes, even more intriguing.
They serve as a reminder that the pursuit of wealth and power, the allure of the forbidden, these are timeless themes that transcend technological boundaries.
So as we conclude our deep dive into the world's biggest bank robberies, what key takeaways would you leave our listeners with?
First, security is never absolute. Whether it's a physical vault or a digital fortress, there will always be vulnerabilities that criminals can exploit. Second, the motivations behind these crimes are complex and varied, often going beyond simple greed. And finally, as technology continues to evolve, so too will the methods of those who seek to exploit it. We're entering a new era of crime, and the stakes are higher than ever before.
It's a lot to think about, and perhaps a reminder to be vigilant, to question our assumptions, and to stay informed about the evolving landscape of crime and security. In our increasingly interconnected world,
Well said. And who knows, maybe someday we'll be doing a deep dive into the top 10 biggest cyber heists in history. But until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.